Hello, Waterford Public Schools, and welcome back to Lancer Library Radio. It's been over 15 months since our last broadcast, and I hadn't planned on bothering you again, but then something happened. Ian Cheney, Waterford High School history teacher and longtime supporter of Lancer Library Radio, published a book. Today I'll be talking to Ian about his book, the writing process, and throw him a few rankings to try on the fly. The book is called Who Made the West? A Ranking of the 30 Most Influential Figures in Western History. Ian Cheney, thank you for being on Lancer Library Radio.
Thank you, Matt. Did you just do this entire introduction without mentioning the last time we were on the stage in the Waterford High School auditorium?
You know, I was trying not to make it about me. I was trying to make it about you.
Make it about you.
If you want to recount that particular point.
Well, if I recall, the third man at this table, Shane Valley, invited us to be a part of the cast for The Crucible, and we played some of the elderly citizens of
Salem, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
They did some age makeup for us. You didn't need as much as I did, if I recall.
No.
But it was a great time. And you were Giles Corey. I was Francis Nurse. And here we are back, the three of us.
Back on the we have the band back together.
Yeah.
So it's a great thing. And you know, by bringing that up, I was going to wait to the end, but why wait?
Okay.
Because people may not listen that long. I want to make certain
Rank
that
the people executed at Salem, Massachusetts. Yeah, okay.
We could do that. No, we won't be doing the ranking of... No, I wanted to thank Shane Valley for being here and doing the recording of this. Mr. Cheney, Ian Cheney, would refuse to go on Lancer Library Radio originally because all we had was the technology of Zoom.
Yes.
And understandably, so he's a man of standards, although here he is. So how standard can you get? All right, so let's talk about the book. And let's start off with the title, Who Made the West? A Ranking of the 30 Most Influential Figures in Western History. So help me out with this. First of all, let's start off with something simple. Why 30?
Okay, the 30, it's not a good answer, but I understand the question. I had to kill 30 months. That's why.
Oh.
I was writing for a website. It was called Construction Literary Magazine. And I was writing about the election, the 2012 presidential election, which had just ended. And I wanted to write about the 2016 presidential election, which wouldn't heat up for another 30 months or 2.5 years. And so I went to them. We came up with an idea of monthly columns about history, and I love rankings. So I said I'm going to rank 30 people, the 30 most important people in Western history.
All right,
one a month for 30 months.
So we got the 30 down. That was based upon presidential elections. We'll talk more about your friend's website, the blog, in a moment. What does influential mean? How do you define, for the scope of this book, influence?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I do try to get into that pretty early in the book regarding the impact, the ripple effects that one person can have across history.
And looking at the table of contents, obviously, influence does not necessarily mean positive influence.
Yeah.
There's some negative influencers.
Yes, among them, Adolf Hitler.
Sure.
So let's take the most negative of them all. Hitler is on the list because the list isn't an evaluation of who was good, and that's why I was so careful with the wording. I could have said the 30 greatest figures of history, and that would have been a bit more loaded. But just by influence, I could throw in some people had negative impact, like Hitler, across history, and that's it. There were some pretty incredible people in their time, but do we still feel their impacts today? And that was the true evaluation.
So I want to talk about some specific entries a little bit later on in the interview, but so give me a sense of who we no longer feel the effects of, or at one point they threw that rock into the pond of history, the ripples went out, but they're not rippling towards us anymore.
Right, I get you. That was well painted.
Thank you. That's my English teacher coming out.
So that's a difficult answer because if it's a famous person, of course they had influence. So it's really difficult. I probably had a list of 200 or 300 names at first, and then it was about culling them down. So any name that I give you, there is going to be one of, how many listeners do you have typically?
Right now we have Shane.
Okay.
So thank you, Shane.
But beyond that, surely millions.
Millions.
And in those millions, no matter what name I give, that person's going to say, that's preposterous. That person should have been in the top 30 because they were so important. So everyone has certain levels of importance, but then it's about grading them against each other. Mm-hmm. And that's when you got to make some difficult cuts. So someone like Leonardo da Vinci, who I know is a personal favorite of yours.
Great guy.
For understandable reasons. Contemporaries.
Sure. Exactly.
You can both write with both hands backwards.
We grew up together, and we have an affinity for wearing pink gowns.
So there's all that. So I'm insulting you by saying your boy Da Vinci didn't make it, which sounds, I know, preposterous. He's so famous, and he was so talented across so many different areas. But compared to others, I can't draw a straight line from Da Vinci to why we do certain things the way we do today.
Well, I think the important thing with Da Vinci, and we've spoken of this earlier, is there was so much information that so many things that he was interested in that he wrote down volumes and volumes and never published. And because of that, so where is the influence if we're only finding about it after the fact, saying, ooh, he really knew a lot? I completely agree with leaving Da Vinci off the list.
Great.
And
let's take Leif Erikson. So Leif Erikson, the famous Viking, crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived in North America centuries before Europeans were doing that, which is an incredible accomplishment. But because he did that, what happened?
Nothing.
Not very much. And so, in a list of influence, Leif Erikson doesn't make it.
No, I agree with that as well. I mean, and again, this is, in fact, up until about, 50, 100 years ago, that was considered to be a complete myth, a complete fabrication that the Vikings had been here.
Yeah.
Until we started finding evidence in Maine. So obviously, we weren't staying up at night thinking, how come there's no statue of Leif someplace?
Correct.
So
we can go tear it down.
Exactly. We might talk about that later on, too.
Fantastic.
So influence we have, good and bad. What about the West? How far east
does the West go? That's in a spherical globe, and I think that's the theory most of us are still working with.
Is Moscow part of Europe or part of Asia?
Great question. Such a good question.
Days.
So thanks to the 26th ranked figure in the book, Peter the Great, Moscow, Western Russia became westernized. And so I do consider them a part of the Western world because their culture became westernized. It's not merely a matter of geography. But the traditional sense, we're talking ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and then those who inherited their culture, typically to the west of them in Europe.
So North Africa used to be part of the West.
It used to be part of the Roman Empire.
Sure.
So you have that. But Latin wasn't ingrained into Northern Africa like it was, say, in Western Europe.
Yeah.
The Greek that Alexander the Great spread east to, say, the Middle East was, not exactly part of the West either. So, there's these geographic and cultural considerations to make.
At some point you have to make a line or else it just becomes
the world.
And as you've said, you like making rankings. And I think a ranking, any list is the beginning of an argument.
Yes.
And so...
no. You're wrong.
Wait a minute. Okay, don't start with me here. This is my radio show.
You brought up lists. No, you're right about that.
Here's a tough one.
Oh, go ahead.
Here's a tough one. Or maybe not. El Andalus. Is Muslim Spain the West?
I don't think so. So when, after the Arab conquest of Iberia, they're bringing in a different culture than what we would call Western culture. And it's up to those Western Catholics to then, through the Reconquista, take over Iberia and Westernize it.
I see. Yeah. Okay. All right, great. So we get some basic stuff down about the title, and we have some footing down. I think this is a perfect time to get to our first ranking on the fly.
Oh, my goodness.
If you want to turn that over. All right, so I'm not certain about your physical health.
Okay.
But if you did have to choose between the following chief medical officers from Starfleet,
Oh, my goodness.
you have McCoy, Crusher, Pulaski, Bashir, and I'm going to give you a wild card if you want to use it.
What does a wild card mean in this situation?
It means you can choose any of the other doctors because I haven't watched the other shows, so I don't know them as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, Dr. McCoy. I mean, the original, the real McCoy,
You would trust
if you will.
the real McCoy. You would. So that's number one on your list. Is you're not feeling well, you're going to him.
We're making technology even across the doctors. If we're not giving them the technology of future generations, he would have been the best on the fly working with what he had compared to the others.
You don't think I'm. Okay, first of all, the fact that you didn't even mention Pulaski, I think, is absolutely correct.
Well, yeah.
I want nothing to do with her.
Please.
But Crusher?
Love
Great
Dr. Crusher.
bedside manner, too.
Without question, Dr. Crusher is probably second on my list, followed by Dr. Bashir, Mr. Wildcard, Dr. Wildcard fourth, and, yeah, Pulaski. I mean.
Yeah, I know. Just the way she treated Data. Anyway, we'll get to that. All right, so that was our first ranking down.
Thanks so much.
The folk that is listening at home, they can play along. We'll put the same rankings in the comments section, so you can test yourself against
Are you trying to get people to not listen to this? Star Trek doctors.
What do you mean? Look, I could have done captains, and that would have been a layup. That would have been too easy.
But more accessible for the general population. I'm
Who
trying to
doesn't
sell
know
books,
Bones
Matt. I'm trying to
McCoy?
move product. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen the people on your list? Right. Gregory Pincus?
Right.
You trying to move product?
He's not moving anything.
No. All right. So let's take a step back from the book itself.
Okay.
And you mentioned briefly your friend's blog.
Yeah.
So how did this whole thing, what's the evolution of the whole thing start from ground zero with this book?
So I had a blog first. It was a website called Presidential Politics for America. It's still out there. It exists.
And also a Twitter feed. And
Yes.
I've enjoyed reading your articles about politics that I can generally understand.
Thank
so
you.
Good.
Yes, I mean I've stopped the website, but for a while it's pretty active on it. And the another upstart website, as I mentioned earlier, Construction Literary Magazine. I actually did not know the editors; they were not my friends. But we had a mutual friend who knew they were looking for someone to write about the 2012 election, and he showed them my work. They liked it, and they asked me to come write for them back in 2012. But then I stopped afterwards because I got too busy in my life. I had kids, and so I stopped writing for them, but still continued the blog. And it's on my blog where I actually finished the ranking.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me more about the Presidential Politics for America. I'm certain, once people read this book, they're going to go back and read your blog posts, especially the illuminating ones about the 2016 and 2020 elections.
Right. So that's
when did you start that blog?
The first time I wrote about presidential politics was actually in 2004 it was called Blogspot. Did you ever remember that
I remember
website?
Blogspot.
It was an atrocious website, but I was an atrocious writer, so it was actually a pretty good marriage. And I did my best, which is always my advice to my students now, is you got to write more to become a better writer. You got to experience it, just like if it were a sport or an instrument. You have to do it over and over to get better. So I knew that I had interest in politics, but I couldn't really write about it. So every 4 years, I wrote about these elections. So all the way back to 2004. And I feel like I've gotten better each time. And when I go back and look at the early stuff, it's truly bad.
So what have you gotten better at? Have you gotten better at the understanding your audience, setting up the process for how I'm going to write something, or understanding how to put the content into context?
Yeah.
What do you feel like you're doing better at because of the continual writing about these elections?
It used to be a whole lot of words that I don't think anyone would care about. It was just a lot without any thought to choosing precise words, and that made really bad writing. So more recently, I try to not waste sentences, try not to waste words, so I'm not wasting the reader's time. Mm-hmm. That said, they still get pretty long because I think there's a lot of important things to say, and you mentioned the word context. That's what I think is most often lacking in modern political writing is larger context for why people feel the way they do, and that then explains their actions. But that's not easy. You gotta take time to lay that out.
Well, I think that one of the great strengths of presidential politics for America is the fact that you don't seem to be taking sides. You're not ranking. Or if you are ranking, you're ranking in a very generalized way, like, say, maybe the slate of Democratic contenders in 2020. But it seems a very even-handed approach, and you do take time to talk about voters that feel disenfranchised from whatever end of the political spectrum. So you seem more of an explainer, a teacher, if you will.
Yeah, some might call me a teacher.
Some.
Yeah.
Certainly not the people that pay you. So so that's what I liked about presidential politics for America. So you mentioned this briefly at the beginning when you talked about you started off with a list of 200 or 300.
Yes.
And in terms of the book's beginnings, first of all, so we've discussed briefly that I don't want to bring up the number one on this list. We'll save that for the people so we can move product, as you
Drama.
say. But did you know the ending when you started?
Oh, wonderful. Before I wrote number 30, yes, I did. But before I wrote number 30, there was months of hand-wringing. And I would say, in fact, I can say precisely, 4 different people held the number 1 spot at some point over the months of preparation.
you didn't start writing the essays until you had a solid list?
That's correct.
Okay.
Until I had my 1 to 30 in the order I wanted them, because I knew I would be in earlier rankings previewing future.
Are we talking
people.
here like a large board in your basement with like pieces of string connecting things? Were you?
It was an Excel spreadsheet, but
Okay.
that gets across the idea of me trying to make something that was cohesive. So yeah, I'd say, can I at least give the contenders, people who spent time at number 1, were swapped out? Okay, in no particular order, which is rare for me. Jesus of Nazareth spent time at number 1. John Locke spent time at number 1. Isaac Newton spent time at number 1. Christopher Columbus spent time at number 1. And Johannes Gutenberg spent time at number 1. Each of those 5 people spent time at number 1. 4 of them were swapped out in favor of the ultimate prevailing number 1.
And which we will not get to in this radio broadcast unless you bring it up. Okay,
Understood.
So we're talking about the beginnings of the book and the editing process. I think it's time for another ranking.
Okay.
So if you had a chance to introduce someone walks out of a cave.
Am I picking up the next paper?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Someone walks out of a cave and they've never heard of the Beatles.
Oh, my goodness.
Which album? How would you go? I've given you, 5 different albums?
Yes. Well, you give me 4 and another wild card.
Another wild
which
card.
I'll be dipping into for this.
I assumed you would. Okay. So if you were going to start them off on their Beatle education. And I have to tell you that this question went through a wide variety of permutations as well.
Not unlike my ranking.
Not unlike your ranking. So what are the let's see if I have this in front of me here someplace. So we have, going chronologically, with the Beatles, their second album out of the UK, A Hard Day's Night, Rubber Soul, Abbey Road, Wildcard. Which album are you going to play to that person walking out of the cave first to say, look?
Let me ask you the questions for once. So,
Ouch.
Of these, I'm going to go wild card. But you left off Please Please Me. That's not my wild card choice. But why would you do that? Why would you have With the Beatles and not Please Please Me?
Well, I also don't have
any number of albums.
I don't have Sgt. Pepper. I don't have.
Well, there it is.
Well, look, it's about working within limitations. You just don't like being boxed in. You don't like the idea of having no control over this. But I gave you the wild card.
This is correct.
So that you would have some wiggle room, as it were.
The answer is Sgt. Pepper's. You talk about a transformational album, not just...
No, that's not what I'm talking. I'm not talking about a transformational album. I'm talking about an introductory album. How are you going to get? Are you going to start off by saying just
okay.
dropping the needle and saying, "Here you go, kids, meet Billy Shears"?
You've turned you've turned the tables on me. You're right. You said introductory, just like I said influential. I didn't say greatest, and you didn't say greatest.
No.
That's remarkable. What a host. This is far and away the best.
He's not answering the question.
The best hosting
I'll let him keep on
I've
saying
ever been a part of for
nice things.
my book promotion.
Anytime. I'm certain. Anyway, we'll talk about this. So anyway.
The best introductory album for the Beatles, well, it's probably with the Beatles. I mean, if you have to start, you have to start at the earliest possible one of the choices. Yeah.
I was looking because the album listings are different UK for US because Capitol screwed around with them at first.
Right.
I think With the Beatles is very strong, but I don't know. I think Rubber Soul kind of is that bridge where they finally get their early stuff polished, but they're also, you get nowhere. Anyway, okay.
Okay, well,
that's fine.
Is Led Zeppelin coming up or The Who? Because those are more in our wheelhouse.
That was my music ranking.
Oh, okay.
We had the Star Trek ranking.
All right.
We had the music ranking.
I could do Beethoven symphonies if you'd like.
I was actually.
I can give you an hour on Beethoven symphonies.
You can.
Shane doesn't want that, apparently.
You can. Shane and I will be far away at that point, but we'll keep on playing. All right, let's go on to the next part.
Okay.
We talked about the title of the book. We talked about the book's beginnings. What about your beginnings? When did you get interested in history? I mean, you have a deep interest in history. You did not trip over your interest in history. This is a growing thing.
I hate to be too self-promotional, but teachers make such a difference. You know what I mean? And it's because my best teachers at every step of the way were in history. My favorite high school teacher period, his name is Mr. Rourke, still teaching at NFA. That was...
Shout out to Mr. Rourke.
Mr. Rourke, yeah, James Rourke. Also a published author, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So in ninth grade I had him, and for the first time ever, I was interested in something academic, and it was history.
And prior to that, you were only interested in baseball and Led Zeppelin.
Correct. And in fact, yes, those are the exact two things. I've
done my research.
Yeah,
Come
clearly,
on.
you know me. I'm open book. But so that was it. And then in college, my best professors were history professors. Now, might have been because the subject material was so interesting and the professors weren't particularly, maybe. But I knew I was drawn to history thanks to them bringing out all these eras and characters. They are characters. It's not fiction, but it's still characters that really sweep away the whole narrative.
Yeah. There's definitely a story there that and there is a narrative. It seems like, even if it's imposed.
Yes. Good point.
Somebody else. You mentioned very briefly in the introduction your grandfather.
Yeah.
Thomas Rees Cheney.
Theodore Rees Cheney.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Author of a number of books, among them being on writing creative nonfiction.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about him?
Sure. Born in 1928, passed away in 2008 at the age of 80. He was a professor at Fairfield University, as my father was for some time, making it all the more devastating when I applied to go there and they said no because my grades were so bad. And this great Cheney dynasty collapses under my watch. But I certainly deserved I deserved the rejection.
What was your grandfather professor of?
Writing, in English.
Okay.
And a brilliant writer. And he was, back when I first started writing, I told you that 2004 was right when I started. He would look at it and he would be honest with me. And he gave me tips that would last for so long that now I can't even remember what they were because they've become ingrained into the way I approach writing. Mm-hmm. And it really, really left a mark. And he loved talking about writing, which was it is unusual and it was unprecedented in my lifetime. Who likes talking about writing? It seems like you do, right?
I do.
And now I do.
Yeah.
But I never did, nor did I know anyone out of my family who did. And so it really it left a mark and made me see the value in the written word.
And can you think of any of his favorite writers? Did he ever talk about who in particular he liked?
No. He, you think he would have provided source material like that, but no, it was always about editing my work. Never about promoting any other authors, really. Yeah.
Well, he sounds like a great guy. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, he was.
And he's a published author. Mm-hmm. Your father is a published author.
Yes.
What is your? In fact, I think the Lancer Library has one of your father's works. I don't know how many books has your father published.
He's published, I think he might be up to 30 now, maybe even eclipsed 30.
Wow. I have his book on Thanksgiving in the Lancer Library.
So his name is Glenn Allen Cheney. And so just like his father before him, he became a published author at a younger age than me, and is still doing it, still writing, and gets paid for his writing, which is a remarkable thing.
I was going to say, that's probably the most remarkable thing.
It certainly is. And now he's taking a late turn toward art. He's starting to paint and selling his artwork alongside his books at farmers markets, for example. So really talented guy.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
When did you start teaching here?
2006 was my first year.
This is your first teaching job, correct?
That's correct. My first, 2006. So this is now my 16th year.
Okay.
Yeah.
You sticking around?
I hope so.
All right.
As long as they'll have me, I'll be here.
All right. Well, our next ranking.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
You talked about the most influential people.
Oh my God.
But let's talk about the most influential animals in human history, not just the West. And I've got a list here for those of you playing at home. Dogs, cats, bovines, you can keep that wide open, rats, herring, cod, and once again,
Wild card.
Well, there may be things that you're thinking of that I'm not bringing to this conversation, which is what generally happens whenever I have a conversation with anybody. So I thought the wild card is a nice way for you to add in. So,
okay. Number one, dogs.
Dogs.
Man's best friend. I mean, if you think of their role in, say, the Mesolithic era, when we couldn't have better hunting companions to get us through that period, to get us our protein, to strengthen our bodies, we couldn't have done it without dogs.
So it's true. Their relationship goes very far back with us. What about rats, though? Rats seems like they've played a huge influence on human history.
You don't have the Black Death without rats. Without the Black Death, you don't have
the development of the English language.
Yes, I was thinking the end of serfdom and the end of feudalism and the modernization of the world. The Renaissance might not be possible without the thinning of the population that the Black Death so generously provides.
Yeah, that's very nice of them.
Rats number two. I'm on board. Well, cats though. Where cats have to be last. Make the case for cats.
Well, I'm not certain. I don't have to make the case for cats. I'm asking you the questions. I just threw a bunch of names together.
Okay, good.
Why would I?
We're
however,
on the same page
cats
on the cats
have been great at eliminating vermin, and there's an argument made. I'm not certain how well it is, that if there wasn't such a negative feeling towards cats prior to the plague years, associating them with the devil and witches, that the cats
take care of the rats.
Would have taken care of the rats.
Wow.
But which would have taken care of the plague. Herring and cod, I think I was thinking of Mike O'Connor.
As I am frequently.
Yes. So I think a big impact. Anyway.
We're losing Shane.
So we're losing Shane. He's falling asleep over here. Thank you, everyone else, for staying awake with us. All right. Let's get back to the book itself and the entries within here. There are 30 entries, 31 actual people, however. Mm-hmm. The first one, no spoiler here, Plato and Aristotle. But you had these things posted up on your blog for a long time, right?
Yes.
So as far as you can tell from the comments section or from people that have picked it up for the first time, what's the most controversial? Either the figure you included, didn't include, or their ranking, however you want to answer that.
That's great. So without giving spoilers away for number one, right? There was a few that people thought were too low. I don't want to reveal them because one of them was in that mix of the number one figure. But I do think number 7 is really controversial. And I have had some feedback with people strongly disagreeing with how low the person at number 7 was.
I immediately went to that one because I knew that would be a gripping one. Number 7, I think we can say this, without fear of too much. It's Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus of Nazareth.
I think people can see through that clue, yeah.
Yeah. So that's dropping a hint there. And what were people's reaction to it?
Well, the first instinct, and in fact mine, is that Christianity is the world's largest religion, that more people call themselves Christian than any other faith, that the Bible is probably the most referenced work in history, or at least perhaps the most well-read.
And probably taught English to more people,
Yeah.
whether they wanted to learn it or not.
Or whatever their vernacular language was, sure. So for these reasons, it seems like Jesus is a slam dunk. And that's why, in fact, on my initial iteration, I put him at number 1. But then the more analysis I did, the more I felt that the effects of Jesus aren't as palpable, aren't as clear as the people I've ranked ahead of him. In other words, take, for example, that in Jesus' name, people have done any number of things across, say, the moral spectrum.
That are very unchristian.
Correct.
At times.
So the Crusades was for spreading the cross, and that involved killing a lot of people, innocent people, which Jesus would have discouraged. And yet they were impacted. They say they were impacted by Jesus, but my feeling is they just wanted to conquer the Holy Land.
Yeah.
And Jesus was the justification. So it wasn't because they were Christian that they were doing that. In fact, if they were truly Christian, they would not have done it. So then there's, of course, the endless charity that we get from Christians at the same time on the other end of the spectrum. You take politics, right? You have conservatives and liberals both thinking they're doing what Jesus would want. So again, my guess is people are doing what they think is right and then looking for a retroactive justification from any number of sources, including perhaps Christianity. So the more I thought about that, slowly Jesus inched down the ranking and then settled in at number 7. And I thought the top 6 each had much more direct and clear impacts on the modern world.
Okay.
Do you think I got through that without having to be fired later?
Not well. You won't be fired by me, so you're good.
That's great.
You can still make my lattes. What about? So I think you've talked about this. Was there one in particular that was very difficult to place? Was there one? So we talked about the fact that the number 1 spot was very fluid for a while.
Yes.
But was there a particular entry that was very fluid going up and down the rankings? And if so, what made you change? Well, for that matter, are you still happy with the list?
I'm still happy with the list. Once in a while, I have regrets at some people toward the bottom.
Such as?
Gregory Pincus.
Explain Gregory Pincus for all the listeners out there who aren't Pincused up.
Okay. So he's not a household name.
He may not be.
So, I mean, he was a lot of fun to write about. So he's the inventor of the birth control pill. And for that reason, it was just a lot of fun to write about because I got to talk about some,
Yes.
inappropriate,
What? No, I don't. No, can you explain?
Starts with S and ends with like S.
I don't. You're
Cervix.
losing me here.
Cervix.
That's right.
Right. Oh, were you thinking? Oh, no, you're thinking something
I was
else.
thinking something else.
So
Anyway.
Gregory Pincus invents the birth control pill. And, I think I make a pretty good case for why he's so important as a result because of all the things that stem from that. But toward the end of it, I get into this long-term projection of the future of mankind, which I think at times, maybe that wasn't appropriate to lean so heavily on what I'm projecting toward the future and how important birth control is for that. But I still think the analysis stands on Pincus. So I just go back and forth. But then I think of people who didn't make the list, like Julius Caesar. He doesn't make the list. And I'm like, how did I not find a spot for Julius Caesar? Should I have bumped off?
How did you not find a spot? What was the deciding thing that you went?
Is it just one thing? I wish it were. It would have been a lot easier. There are so many things to think about for all of these people. And I only had 30 spots. So, of course, Caesar's important. And Augustus Caesar is important. Well,
Why is Caesar important?
I mean, the backbone.
Other than the fact that he's a great knife holder, I mean,
he's not good at dodging knives. However.
No, he's not good at dodging knives.
No, but the Roman Empire's influence on the development of the West, the Latin language, the rule of law, the calendar, a lot of that has transitioned into the modern world. But I kind of thought that Caesar and Augustus split the responsibility there, which halved their importance. HALVED. But Alexander Fleming should have found a place in this list, but I only had 30 spots. And Churchill, but I only had 30 spots. In fact, there's a chapter dedicated to those who just missed the list.
And I have to say, I enjoyed reading that as much, if not more, than some of the entries.
Oh,
just
great.
Getting inside.
That's how bad some of the entries were. Yeah.
It was, yes. All right, fine. You sussed me out.
I got you.
No, I enjoyed seeing the process. Yeah. I enjoyed, and I suppose that's why most of my questions are about the process, because I can see the end result and I can enjoy it and read it, but I want to pull the curtain back and see what the great and powerful Oz is doing all the while. So not from the West, but influenced on the West. I've got a short list, and you can make it longer. Muhammad.
Yes.
Seems to be the obvious one at that number one spot. Genghis Khan maybe a second, close second. Is there anyone else you would put in that group for not from the West, but a huge influence on the West?
Absolutely. The Emperor Meiji in Japan, who modernized Japan, and kind of, I mean, his impact on the rest of the world through the World War II. Not his impact, but Japan's impact later. Attila the Hun, forcing in Germanic tribes into the Roman Empire, hastening its fall, which then brings on the Middle Ages.
Sure.
Buddha and Confucius, maybe not so much an impact on the West, but an impact on billions of people in the East, which certainly infiltrates, Western development.
Sure.
There is a footnote in this book. People have to go find it on themselves. Where I rank
by the way,
in my opinion, all the non-Western figures of.
Could you rank all the footnotes in your book? No, it would take far too long. The footnotes are a joy to read. Perhaps you'll publish them separately at some point.
There are hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. That's
all
true.
right. We have one more ranking to do, and then I have we're going to wrap this up in a moment. The last ranking would be best presidential speeches. And you'll thank one of your colleagues in the workroom for the late entry. You have your choice. And how you define best, got them elected, got them support, got them noticed. Either Roosevelt. In fact, add Eleanor in there. Personally, my particular favorite Roosevelt. Lincoln. Jed Bartlett.
Yeah. You mean from the West Wing? The greatest TV show of all time.
The greatest president that we've ever had.
Got it.
Thank you. Let Bartlett
be Bartlett.
Kennedy, and again, President Wildcard.
Boy, you've picked the best ones in terms.
Do you think these are the best orators?
The best orators, or at least we don't know Lincoln's oration very well. The closest we got is Daniel Day-Lewis, but the words themselves, if we take that, and it's Lincoln, and it's the Gettysburg Address. What I like most about it is its brevity. And the fact that this returns to something we talked about earlier. When brevity of words is possible, it's always preferable.
Well, didn't the guy that went before him, what was it, Edward Horton?
I'm not sure.
He said in 2 minutes what I spoke about for 2 hours.
Right.
I mean, the 19th century was not known for its brevity of wit. They were more than happy to.
Right.
Yeah.
And just the substance of renewing America in that moment was really quite something. But hey, Jed Bartlett.
Well, there you go.
Martin Sheen is truly a gift to this country.
All right. So I've got one more piece for you, and this is where we've talked a lot about sort of the nastier parts of this whole thing.
Yeah.
The trying to get it down to 30. I think my listeners,
Connor,
maybe too, will know. They should know that you are a devotee of Star Trek.
Correct.
So it'll not come as a surprise if I say to you, Descent, Part 1, The Cold Open. All right. For those of you who do not know, and the beginning of the episode called Descent in Star Trek The Next Generation, the android Data creates a simulation where he sits down to poker with Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Stephen Hawking, three of the world's greatest scientists, two of which appear on your list.
Yes.
So I ask you, given the same circumstances, who would be at your poker game? They have to be on your list. No wild cards this time. Sorry.
Okay. So who do I want? This is very important criteria. Who do I want at my house playing cards with me?
Your children may be in the next room.
Okay.
And you can see, I mean, if poker's not your game, I don't know, maybe Operation or Trouble. I don't know.
Well, if it were Risk, I would not want Napoleon.
Too much risk.
Okay. Give me George Washington.
I'll give you George Washington. A little bit stiff, but probably he would be very respectful of your wife and children. So
I've got a lot of questions for George Washington.
What question?
Well, some political and some moral.
Such as? Oh, well,
yeah.
There was one.
There was that one moral thing.
Yeah, that
about
slavery
Washington
thing. Sure.
Right. I want to get inside his mind. I want to ask lots of follow-up questions. Okay, so give me Washington.
Okay. They're going to be at your house playing poker, so you at least got to be nice to them. You can't just, George, how are you, and why did you own people?
Fair enough.
You can't just go right. You may want to have some chips first.
Give me Karl Marx. I feel like if he won, he would have to give back a lot of the money that I lost to him. So I'll take Marx.
The means of production is in a winning hand.
Yeah. And boy, I wish you gave me time with this question. I think Elizabeth I, because everyone's welcome, men, women, everybody. They're welcome. They're welcome at the poker table for me.
And she seems like, from what little I've heard, I mean, she charmed Parliament.
Yes, I heard she seems very charming.
And I mean, she's got to be able to figure out how to work a room, because I mean, at least in their early years. Later on, she knew she was Virginia, so she could do whatever the heck she wanted. But
right.
All right. So those are the three people. We got George Washington, Karl Marx,
yep, Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth I. Anyone else that's not on your list that you would love to sit down with?
Aside from you and Shane?
We can do that right now. I'm hoping that the chips are ready and that we can get... Who else?
Give me Gandhi. Give me the Buddha.
Wow.
I have a lot. Give me Socrates.
So you don't really have to worry about hanging up any coats. That's what you're saying.
True.
All right.
Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom out there that I think we can all learn from some of those guys.
That might be nice. It might be interesting to see how they could. You think the Buddha could? Does he have a tell? Could he really fake it? Anyway, all right. Lancer Library radio listeners, thank you so much for joining us after 15 months in hiatus. I wouldn't have gotten back on the air except for the fact that our good friend and colleague Ian Cheney wrote and published a wonderful book, highly recommended. The link to it will eventually be will be below this video or the audio of it. I want to thank Ian for showing up and being subjected to all my rankings. And I can't thank Shane Valley enough for providing the technology. I hope everyone enjoyed the interview. If you didn't, it's my fault. If you did, it's
No. It's my fault.
All right. Look,
All right.
He's got to get the last word, doesn't he? Anyway.
Matt, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again.